I'm going to speak for a few minutes, at least, on these 4 tarot cards. They are some of the top arcana of the tarot deck. You have the Magician, he's number 1. The High Priestess, she's number 2. The Empress is number 3. And the Emperor is number 4. You can see the numbers at the top of each card. Last night I was taking a bath, I was soaking, and I had a bit of a brainstorm, or a channeling, if you will, I guess, of the Empress. And I think this came about because I've been going back and forth in my mind for the last few days, questioning who's more powerful, the High Priestess or the Empress. So for those of you who don't know, these two are considered to be sisters in the Arcana. And I would encourage you to don't just look at this like they're tarot cards. This is not just about tarot cards. This is about, first of all, these represent major archetypes in the human mind, of human nature, and they also can represent, because of that, we manifest them in the physical world. So if you will, imagine for a moment, or think back to any of you who've read any ancient history or have seen, let's use the movie 300 as an example. So for those of you who've seen that movie 300 about the Spartans, the Spartan king Leonidas, who held off the Persian army with 300 of his warriors, before he could really do anything, if you'll recall in that movie, King Leonidas had to go to what would be like considered to be the magicians of his kingdom, the seers, the shamans, the magic makers, the oracles. So those would be represented by obviously the magician here on the far left, number 1. And the High Priestess here, left of center, number 2. And if you'll recall, it said in the movie, and it showed it, they were nasty, gross creatures. They were deformed, and not just physically deformed, they were deformed in their minds and in their characters. And they used this beautiful virgin girl as sort of an oracle, and they would keep her, I guess, hopped up on drugs of some sort, and use her to sort of divine and channel messages from the other side. And they would also likely use her sexually, physically. They sort of alluded to that as well. And so in that way, but however, you need to keep in mind that they were not ruling the kingdom, or they were not meant to be ruling the kingdom. They were not the kings or the queens or the empress or the emperor. So in a way, the power was sort of split between these two factions, between the crowned king and queen, or emperor and empress, and the magical side. So those were the ruling side, the governing side, and then there was the magical side, the divine side, the spirit side. And what you need to understand, and I should have already set the stage for this by just pointing out to you how those, nasty, gross, deformed men were using a sweet, innocent, beautiful child, sexually, and keeping her drugged up, in order to do their divinations and work their magic. That is a big part of magic. I've been saying this in many of my videos in the past. Magic is bringing together two opposites. So that's light and dark. That is evil, the most wicked, disgusting evil that you can imagine, but also the most pure innocence that you can imagine, and everything in between, all the gray areas in between. So you can see here with the High Priestess, she sits between two columns. One is black and the other one is white. You can see here with the magician on the far left, he's pointing upwards and downwards. And he has all of the suits. He's got the cup, he's got the pentacle, he's got the sword, and he's got the wand. So he brings together all of the elements to make magic. The high priestess here, she brings together the two major opposite elements to make magic. So, and that's one of the reasons why you had these dirty old men using a sweet girl child and bringing together their two opposite energies in order to kind of create this magic, to kind of open a window into the other world, the spirit world, in order to channel messages, divine messages through. Here's the problem with that. This is why those people, the magicians and the high priestesses, this is why they cannot wear the crown. Because they have to embody a good amount of evil, or at least like half of their nature, half of all has to be evil. It has to represent evil. It has to, and here's the thing about evil. If you sit and meditate on evil long enough and try to figure out its nature, you'll understand that evil does not like to share. It's not a good sharer. It does not like to share power. And if you let it off its leash, if you give it free rein, it will go crazy. It will consume. It wants to consume all light and goodness and innocence and transmute it into more evil. It wants full power over everything. The light and goodness and innocence can often see how it might need to share. They're better at sharing. Good people, quite often, if you think about all the people you've ever met that are good and light, and they just have a light inside of them, they're typically very good at sharing. They're very giving of themselves, their time, their energy. That can have its downside, but it's not, in my experience, it's not nearly as bad as the evil, disgusting, deformed creature that just wants to turn everything evil and disgusting and deformed as well. So for example, I'll give you an example. I recently went out of my way. I gave a good amount of energy and time and resources to trying to help two homeless people get into a shelter. And it got to the point of where it just felt like they were using me. I took them to the police station to get referrals to go to the shelter. Then they weren't sure they wanted to go to the shelter. And then like a week later, they called me out of the blue and said they were ready to go. I took them out to the shelter. I said, all right, I can't come back and get you for a little bit. At least give it a try. If you don't like it, then I can come back and get you, but at least give it a try. I get a phone call a couple hours later after I dropped them off, 2-3 hours later, and they're saying they want to leave, that they haven't even been given anything to eat yet. They were told when they got there they couldn't be processed through the shelter yet till the morning because the nurse wasn't there. So I said, here's the deal. I can either pick you up and bring you back to the gas station. They live behind a gas station, and drop you off there, and we'll call it a day. Or I can go get you a pack of cigarettes. That's another thing they were complaining about. They wanted cigarettes. I can go get you a pack of cigarettes, and I can go get you a couple meals from McDonald's and drive them back out there to you at the shelter, which this place is like on the edge of the city where I live, kind of a little bit out in the sticks. And my car was being a bit shaky, and I just took it. I had to take it to the shop the next day because there were problems with it that if the problems got any worse, I would have wound up on the side of the road. So I was really kind of putting myself out there, risking being, on the side of the road with a broken down car needing a tow, just, taking these guys to the shelter to begin with. But then I offered to bring them out some food, and I offered to bring them out cigarettes. But the deal was they had to stay there and see the nurse in the morning, and they had to give it a real try, for at least a day or two. And I made it clear to them. They chose the cigarettes and the McDonald's. So I was like, okay. And I brought that out there to them. I made a second trip out to the shelter. And I told them when I got out there, all right, you got to give it a real try, though. And I can't come back for you tonight. I can't come back tomorrow. I got work tomorrow. The car's, you felt the car when you're riding it. It's rumbling. There's something up with it. I got to take it to the shop. So I just can't be going back and forth, back and forth. I don't have, endless gas, so on and so forth. So you got to stay here and give it a real try. Well, no sooner did I. So there's like the light part of me giving, trying to help people just out of the goodness of my heart, just wanting people to be all right and get back on their feet and not live, behind a gas station. But then, after I dropped off the McDonald's and the food, and the cigarettes, and got back home again, I was home maybe 20 minutes before I got another phone call from them. And they're saying that, they're walking down the highway away from the shelter. And could I come pick them up again? I was like, what? Why did you leave the shelter? We had a deal, and they were like, well, they told us that we couldn't sit next to each other. And we were just snuggling, watching a video on the phone. It's like, why didn't you just separate a couple, 2-3 feet? Like they didn't, there's rules in these places. They don't want the guys and the girls, mixing and mingling, even if they're husband and wife. They don't want that because, first of all, they can't take care of themselves. They don't want them breeding and making babies that they can't take care of. But also it's a matter of these people haven't been seen by the nurse yet. They haven't been checked out. They don't know their mental state. So as far as they know, it could be like one person might not be in a good mental state. They might not be, they might be handicapped, mentally handicapped. And it could be a matter of one person is taking advantage of the other person. And that's rape, actually. They can't allow rape to happen on their property. So they were telling them, you two need to separate. You can't be, right next to each other snuggling. Or we'll call the police on you. And so these two, I guess, just couldn't tolerate even a single rule where they had to separate a few feet from each other and just prop the phone up somewhere and, watch it from a few feet away, and they just left. And I was like, nope, I'm not coming to get you this time. I already, I made the deal with you. I laid down the rule. But at the same time, I wasn't really I wasn't out of malice, and it wasn't even fed up. It was a matter of I didn't think my car could make it, first of all. I was worried my car wasn't going to make it. And secondly, I was really just hoping that if I didn't go pick them up, they'd just turn around and go back to the shelter, because I begged them. I was like, just go back to the shelter, beg them to take you back, please. 'Cause this is your best chance. I've seen you guys for months living out in the streets, and doesn't seem to be getting any better for you guys. So in that way, sorry is a bit of a story there, but I'm trying to demonstrate for you how good people, we can understand the need to share power with a bit of a dark side. I laid down the law at a certain point and said I put my foot down and said no, I'm not going to come and get you. It's for your own good that you go back to that shelter. I turned off the mothering, protective, nurturing instinct for a few minutes. But it was even more, I guess you could say it was even still for the mothering protective instinct, because it was more for their own good. But so in that way, I'm trying to demonstrate for you that goodness and light has a better ability to share power and room and space and energy with the darkness than darkness does with the light. The darkness will take over if you let it. So this is why I believe the Empress sort of came out in me while I was in the bath and basically she said, this is why they can't wear the crown. This is why the high priestess can't wear the crown. This is why the magician can't wear the crown. Because these two, if you let them, they will turn the world into slaves and sacrifices. Because there's too much of the darkness in them. It might be necessary for them to do what they do, but it has to be kept in check. That darkness has to be kept in check, and we can't trust that they will keep it in check within themselves. And so this is why quite often when we look back at, kingdoms and empires of the past, you had rulers, but then you had the divine people. You had the high priestesses and the shamans and such, and they were different. Once in a while, they were the same person. Once in a blue moon, maybe once in a century, or even longer than that, maybe once in a millennia, you get one or two people who are capable of embodying both the Empress and the High Priestess. They are sisters, after all. But I think that might be too hard for most people. And so this is why, once in a while, you get a ruler who is also the shaman. But more often than not, I think when I try to remember back to reading the histories of the royalty and the ruling classes of major empires, from the Aztecs to the Greeks and the Romans and so on and so forth. More often than not, when the magicians take on the seat of power of the king or the emperor, or the high priestess takes on the seat of power as the empress, it goes downhill from there. It's effed from there, because they let the darkness take them over. So it's sort of a system of checks and balances. It's really a lot of it, if you think about it, is a lot of the weight and pressure the burden is on the shoulders of the Empress, because the Empress is the mother of all. That's what she represents. She's the mother of all the other arcana, even to some degree her sister. You could see her as maybe being the older sister, possibly. I'm not sure. But she represents empathy. She's the one who steps in and says, no. These are not just, our subjects are not slaves. They are not sacrifices. They are people like you, like me. Or did you forget that you're a person too? Did you imagine yourself to be a god? Did you forget that you inhabit a physical body? Did you forget that you have flaws? And so it's when the high priestess or the magician, when those guys start getting out of hand, when their darkness starts to overtake them, when they start thinking that they should be ruling everything, when they start thinking that everything should be slaves and sacrifices, everyone beneath them is just a slave and a sacrifice, that's when the Empress has to step in. And you can't necessarily rely too much on the Emperor on the far right here, because I get the feeling, and I've also read this and heard this from other tarot readers, that the Emperor can kind of flip both ways. He can be very fatherly and protective and represent justice and order and good governing, but he can flip and become very tyrannical. And so if you just have the Emperor under the influence of the magician and the high priestess, he could be too easily flipped. All right, he does not represent the empathy that the Empress represents. So that's where the Empress really needs to step in and make sure her counterpart, the Emperor, so the magician and the high priestess are considered to be counterparts the same way the Empress and the Emperor are. Although I've also heard that things like, the magician and the Empress can kind of get together once in a while. I have not heard yet about the high priestess and the Emperor, but I have heard the magician and the Empress can kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, knock boots. However, again, it's really a lot of it to maintain that balance and keep the light alive and keep the darkness in check. It's really on the Empress's shoulders to step in and grab her husband's attention, grab the Emperor's attention and say, remember, we are meant to be the mother and the father of our people, of our subjects. We are not slave owners. We would not be the Emperor and the Empress if it were not for our people. And we need to have as much invested in their well-being and fairness and justice for them as we do in having any power over them. If we have power over them, it's because, we want what's best for them. It's not because we feel like they're beneath us or that they deserve to just be slaves and sacrifices. So, yeah. And she was saying stuff like, at a certain point, when the magician and the high priestess, when they start to get really too out of hand and too crazy and too dark, that's when the Empress has to step in and say something along the lines of, and sway her husband, the Emperor. But then also the two they sort of provide a unified front. And sometimes she has to embody the Emperor as well. There have been many empresses and queens that have ruled on their own. And that's sometimes when she has to say, like, listen, you guys either settle down or it'll be off with your heads. And she doesn't like to be that person. That's not her natural default state. Remember, her natural default state is to be motherly and protective and nurturing. But it's a matter of, like, I might have to sacrifice one or two of my kids for the greater good of the rest of them. Because one or two of my kids are getting crazy. And they're hurting the rest of my children. And I can't allow this. So, and also remember that the Empress in many ways represents justice. You have what do you call it? The symbol of Venus there. If you look beneath the Empress under her throne, in that little stone heart, you have a symbol of Venus. Venus rules over justice. Libra. So the Justice card, maybe I should have had a picture of the Justice card in here as well. The Justice card, you have a woman sitting also on a throne. She's also between two pillars. In a way, she sort of is an amalgamation, I feel like, of both the High Priestess and the Empress. She's holding a sword in one hand, and in the other hand, she's holding a scale. And that's why justice has always, there's also astrological signs associated with the major arcana. And so you have Venus, you have Libra, you have justice. So a lot of this comes out through the Empress. And so, again, this is why she kind of has to step up once in a while, and she needs to say, like, listen, justice needs to be done. You have overstepped your bounds. You have tread upon the rights of other human beings. You acted as if you were better than others, and you're no better. You have certain abilities that others don't have, but you know what? Others have abilities that you don't have. Like, I've seen people who are, like, incredibly gifted and skilled in many ways, but they can't do what, like, your typical cobbler can do. They couldn't live the life of a plumber. They just couldn't. Like, they couldn't do the same thing, the same activity over and over, day in, day out. But we need that. We need the trash collectors. They're the heroes. I've said this in the past. The trash collectors, the plumbers, the people who help maintain the good hygiene of our society. They do some of the hardest work, and they do it day in and day out with very little thanks. And in relationship, in contrast to many others in our society, they do it for very little money. I think that should change. But then you have, the artists who we like, the Kardashians. Kim Kardashian could not be a plumber. You understand what I'm saying? She's just a celebrity. Like, she's just an idol, an icon. That's a gift of hers. But there are things. Just the point is, there are things that she can't do that our society still needs. We need, in fact, you could really make the argument, we need the trash collectors and we need the plumbers way more than we need the Kardashians, right? So if the Kardashians started getting it in their heads, man, I should rule this bitch. I should, like, all these plumbers and all these teachers and the nurses and the bus drivers and the trash collectors, they're my bitches, they're my slaves. They're here to be sacrifices to me. that bitch, like, that's when the Empress would step in and be like, no, bitch, I'm sorry, you're overstepping your bounds, you're forgetting yourself. We actually need those people way more than we need you. So, and she, that's when she would say, like, listen up, you're either going to, if one of the Kardashians, like, violated the human rights of a plumber or a trash collector or a nurse or something like that, because she got it in her head that she was more important, that's when the Empress would step in and be like, no, we can't have this. Justice will be done. You need to understand that justice is blind. It's equal for all, from the lowest peasant living on the streets, even to me. It applies to myself. It applies to the emperor. It applies to everyone. You don't get to just take advantage of others and hurt others for your own gain, your own selfish gain, and skirt justice. You don't get to do that. So it was a bit harsher coming out last night. Like, she was mad. Like, the Empress was like, biatch, there's no who's more powerful. Like, she's like, my sister might have more power in some ways. She might be able to divine better than I can. She might be a bit more intuitive and a bit more connected with the other side than I am. But I'm more connected with humanity and empathy and the heart. No, she's got the heart right there. All right. And she's like, and I'm the one who's more connected with justice and fairness. She's like, I'm the mother, bitch. Like, so that's why I wear the crown. And so I feel like if the Empress is being tapped, it must be because the High Priestess and or the magicians are getting out of hand. They're taking things too far. They're overstepping their bounds. They're trying to turn the population into slaves and sacrifices because they think that they're better than everyone else, when that is simply not the case. All right? So don't be fooled by the fact that she's the third in the Arcana and the High Priestess is the second. It's maybe more a matter of the High Priestess is just closer to the other side, the divine. Well, not just the other side, the place that we all come from. The only thing that comes before the Magician in the Arcana is the Fool. The Fool is card number 0. And that sort of represents like a child, either an actual child or someone who's child-minded, or someone who's starting over, a fresh start, a new cycle in their life. They're coming at life with just a clean slate, or a new mindset, without the baggage, the psychological baggage. And that's because they're sort of coming in from the other side. They're newly birthed, right? It's a phoenix rising kind of a thing. They're starting at 0. So the High Priestess, she's number 2 in the Arcana because she's a little bit closer to that other side. But remember, that other side is a mixture of, like, an equal mixture of the light and the dark. And down here, though, in human world, in flesh 3D world, we need to keep the dark in check. We have to have a system of checks and balances. We need someone who's a little bit more separate from that light and dark interplay, that even light and dark interplay, in order to keep things fair, just, in order to keep things from becoming a total shit show circus where it's just evil demon magicians ruling over everything and plucking babes from the arms of their mothers and raping them and sacrificing them on an altar in order to get more power for themselves. All right? Because the darkness does not like to share. Evil does not share. If it gets out of hand, it will take over the light. So we need the Empress. We must have her. She's every bit as powerful as the High Priestess, if not possibly more so, and must be so that she can keep that darkness in check. So yeah, all right, I'm gonna stop, prattling on and on and on. But that's just something I felt like I needed to make a video about, because the Empress was sort of having like a heyday in my mind last night. She was just, she's like, I wear the crown, bitch, for a reason. It's hard being me. I have the hardest freaking job. I got to keep my sister in check. I got to keep those nasty, dirty magicians in check. And I got to remind my husband once in a while to not be a tyrant. So, all right. I'm going to leave it there.